I think Americans need to understand that like LLMs are great and they're going to be revolutionary in many categories, typically categories that require search and discovery. Most of the innovation around LLMs are basically the UX experience. The secondary innovation are things related to creative power, so graphics, photos, images, but it doesn't mean that like that's going to replace artists. Like, you know, a Picasso is still a Picasso. People are getting way ahead of themselves in terms of thinking that this is actually going to accurately replicate the creative power of humanity.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got a great treat for you today. Aaron is here. Aaron, let's just jump right into it. You've been in Silicon Valley for quite a while, and you've held a number of views that maybe weren't so popular, now have become much more popular. I think maybe the first place to just start is like, how do you continue to think critically and independently when everybody around you was yelling and screaming the exact opposite of the views that you held?
I mean, yeah, I've been canceled 3 times in my life so far. So first time was because I hosted a Liberty hackathon, and Senator Rand Paul also came, I think, like a day or two before. And the San Francisco Chronicle called me a racist. By the way, my family fled communism from China, and my co-founder is black, so they didn't really like to look us up then. And then I got canceled again for voting for Trump. So I was the only conservative exec in my tech company. I also went to I went to 3 Republican debates, so I became a soft target there. And then I got canceled again for my views on COVID, like big time canceled, like major. So it's just, you know, my dad, who is, you know, the most kind of Chinese American person you could ever think of, once told me that, you know, people aren't going to like you for how you look or what you think, and basically said F them, right? So he told me that when I was like 8, and that has been like kind of instilled in me for since then. But yeah, I mean, I think I was one of the first quote unquote uncloseted Republicans in Silicon Valley back in 2013. And so yeah, since then, it's just been kind of second nature to me. Like the fact that like in my mind, as probably as your mind too, it's kind of bizarre to me that you would like disassociate with something because they like generally think of something within quite the mainstream, and let's say mainstream's above like 10% of the population. And that's just really foreign to me. And I don't do that to those people, but they do it to me. And that's just never been completely clear to me, but they just sort of do it. And Silicon Valley, especially when I went there, you know, it was like hard on ideas, easy on people, right? Things like that. And then it kind of has molded, definitely underneath Obama, it molded into like a calcitrant ideology of like puritanical wokeism, right? And then it just sort of accelerated as like Trump broke people's brains, right? But I kind of stayed where I was, which was kind of like the same kind of like libertarian-esque, kind of anti-neoliberalism orientation. But yeah, I think Silicon Valley has gone through this like breaking point though, because it was easy to punch at Trump, but then post-COVID, post like the Trump administration, I think it has created a massive fissure in Silicon Valley, which I think is good because you see ideologues. And the Hamas thing with the renewed war is also another one. Like you see a break in Silicon Valley, right, where you see very, I would say, a group of rational people who don't agree on like, if you ask them all about abortion, it kind of varies, right? But they kind of are on the zone of like, we believe in like freedom of expression, rational argument. And then you got the other side that basically takes the puritanical wokeism side, that it doesn't matter what you say to them, they're right, they're narcissists, they're going to win, right? And that's kind of like where the actual war has actually been, but it's kind of been mismatched between red and blue, when in reality, like that's always been the divide in tech.
So you now are taking what I'll consider a mental framework or a worldview that was unpopular, now becoming more popular, and you are, quote unquote, productizing it in terms of a company today. Before we get to what you guys are building with Hydra, I want to just talk about the computing wars, advanced computer chips, et cetera. Yeah. What is kind of that industry look like today, and where do you see problems that potentially could be coming up that you want to go ahead and get ahead of and start addressing now?
Well, I think that like for what Americans don't realize is that there's great biographies written about Mao that I think if most Americans read, they would be very shocked at like how stereotypic, or I should say, suspicious and the way in which working with China is not like working with any other good faith actor in the West. That like what they say, what they do is very, very different, and they're very crafty and they're shrewd. As an example, like most of the advanced weaponry that like China has stolen, they didn't invent it; they stole it. Were basically different ways of wedging the U.S. and Russia against each other, and they create these like fake media things, right? One of the greatest examples is when Eisenhower basically threatened to use the nuke over Taiwan. That was a whole setup by Mao to convince the United States to issue that threat. And what Mao did after that was go to the Soviet Union, and because Stalin thought Mao was crazy. Like he was like, "Oh, this guy's like freaking crazy," and that's literally coming from a mass murderer, right? So that tells you how crazy he was. Like, Stalin literally had a list of people he would just go through every night in terms of who would get executed, right? So, and he went to Stalin. He goes, "Hey, man, like you don't want to send Russian blood to defend China. Give me nukes." And he goes, "No, you're crazy." And they came back again, and he goes, "Okay, I'll send you Russian scientists," right? That's how they got nukes. That's how they got subs. That's how they got jets. Right. That's how they got any sort of aircraft designs. Right. It's in the same thing that applied to the economy. Like if you look at most of the high speed trains there, they look a lot like the German designs, right? Because they had German engineers there, right? So this is it's a very different type of warfare that I think Americans are sort of used to, like a Russian style of like, let's just send tanks in, right? They imagine that like that's what conflict looks like, versus like conflict that comes to China is asymmetric and very shrewd. And so when the COVID stuff came out, that was the lens of which I was looking at this stuff. Because I mean, I knew loosely about coronaviruses because I started researching it back like when the first reports started coming out. And I was like, okay, like this is not SARS 2.0, like this is a bit exaggerated. And they started sending those videos of like people falling in the streets. And I was like, no coronavirus does that. Like that's like not a thing, right? And even SARS didn't do that, right? And then the storm just kept brewing and brewing, right? And it was like this echo chamber effect that created so much social pressure on the West to respond that like, basically the safety bias, right? That like, well, we could be wrong. So, but it doesn't matter. We're going to bias first for safety. Versus what I saw was like a propaganda campaign, right? That, and I think that they did not know it was going to be that successful. Because I think at first China, it was real, like, like SARS-CoV-2 is real. But it manifested itself into something they couldn't even control anymore because it just took off so successfully that you notice actually once it starts taking off successfully in response to the Italian outbreak. An outbreak is like is a loose word because it was already been there for like 4 or 5 months. All of a sudden the news from China stops, like the data stops, the reporting stops, right? And this is after the post Wuhan, the building the hospitals and all this like hysteria that China was pushing out to the world. Because at that moment they knew, oh wait, we were actually killing people. Like China was killing people with its hysterical response, with how it was building and promoting hospitals, how it was like treating patients, that it was creating hysteria, right? It was actually causing people to panic and then seeking treatment they didn't need, which is having all these sort of secondary effects, right? And then so the data stops and they just sort of let it ride, right? Because that's actually how China works. So when it comes to like computing, right, which is obviously relates to GPUs and NVIDIA, we have to understand that like they're not just seeking to do AI because it's cool and it like helps me write an academic paper, right? They're seeking AI for alternative ends, mostly to control their own population, but secondarily to build sort of adversarial like AI to like try to take down the stock exchange or electricity or state governments or things like that, and trying to mostly create like phishing schemes, like how to like make that better. But mostly they're trying to do it to control internally their population, which they don't have great control over. And so, but they are going to externalize it. So our country, I don't think actually, one of the great things that the Trump administration, that is an objective, like both parties would agree, is that he changed our view on China. Like if you go back and look at 2015 debates, nobody on that side, maybe Rubio would be the only other one. We're saying China's a risk. It's the biggest risk to us. Who cares about Russia? They're basically just want to be a drunk mobster in the world. They have no interest in replacing us as the king. They just want to annoy us. They're like the second cousin, lives down the street, that's in kind of a kind of crappy house, right? But he has like a really nice car and really, really nice watches, right? That's Russia. He has no interest in running the neighborhood or running the HOA. No interest, right? He just kind of wants to bother people and get paid off with like nice things. So China, though, is like, wants to run the HOA, right? They want to run the neighborhood, right? And Trump saw that. And like whether he did or was advisor, I don't really care. but he changed the orientation of our country to see that as the highest risk, and that's actually a bipartisan issue now. So the Biden administration issuing these regs, which are very, very restrictive regs now on GPUs, they see that and they're basically getting ahead of the game, which I think is like commendable. But there's another side. If you look at the other regs they released, where they basically treat AI as if it's like Skynet, and that it's like actual intelligence versus just basically a different way of doing statistical modeling for machine learning, and they're treating it as if it is like a risk to its own people versus a risk of like an adversary using our chips, like we say, planting stuff in the chip, making it to spy on us, which is kind of the biggest risk. And then secondarily down the risk would be like them actually creating additional like artificial LLMs that can do phishing better is like way down the list. Even farther down the list is actually creating an adversarial agent to like, let's say, attack the stock exchange, right? Like that's possible, but like almost like the required computing power to do that would be like a red hot, dot on the map. You just launch a missile at that data center and blow it up or something. So like the amount of computing power you need to do that would be insane. So like I think that some of the recent regs though, that the EOs and stuff like that is coming out of the Biden administration views AI as if it was written by someone who saw Terminator too many times or The Matrix. And it's kind of embarrassing. And they also started adding, if you read the regs, like it needs to include diversity inclusion. It needs to like who makes the models, and then it has like weights against like biasing against like white anglism, things like that, which I don't even understand how you would even measure that. Like, how do you measure like anglism in a model? Like it doesn't even make any sense, right? So even Chamath, who's like obviously the resident Democrat on I guess you can ask Jason too, but he's like, this is crazy. This is just stupid. It's literally like a Yale grad who's 27 who read a book about AI, just threw every other prior, into the EO and then just spit it out there, right? So I don't think it really goes anywhere, but because it's so crazy, and even Amazon and Microsoft are like, who cares? So like if they're not going to report who's using their models, then nobody is, right? So
now, when you start to look at the AI, maybe the regulatory scrutiny that it's receiving, it seems like that is very U.S. focused. Is this happening in other areas as well? Like, are other geographies or other governments being this onerous or kind of abrasive to this technology, or are they actually doing the opposite? My expectation, without knowing too much about kind of these other geographies and specifically around AI, is that they're probably actually like leaning into it and trying to promote it and say like, hey, there's a fucking global race going on. Let's be the winner.
Yeah, definitely China's promoting it, but obviously they have malicious malintent. So like other countries are viewing this as like, oh, this is interesting. Like let's say European countries, our strongest allies. This is interesting, but we don't really understand it, and we have other issues to deal with, which is like, our society could implode at any moment. So, it's not like Europe is a big harmonious like country right now or continent right now, right? So I think that's more of where it's just interesting. The regulations around like hardware is where a lot of these countries are focusing, which I actually think is legitimate. That like China has a track record of putting crap into things we buy to spy on us and to take IP. Like they have a history of that. That's fine. The EU is really leaning on the US to lead that way because obviously we control Swift, and treasuries, and so that is like the biggest force. And by the way, like those rules are also applying to allies like Saudi Arabia. So like it's I think there's like 20-ish countries it's actually applying to, not just China, but obviously China is like the main target, and includes other countries like Iran, right? And which is that's good. So the downside I think though is that China I think is taking it much more seriously about like how this actually could be applicable and much more functional in terms of its society that I think the US, and it's like you could take, it's like one step forward, two steps back. Like their posture towards hardware is correct. Their actual understanding of AI and how it has implications to the broader society is wrong. Like they the belief around like we need unions now and going back to All In, right? Kalkinaxis has been saying we need like a writers union for like content, like, and it's just I don't even know what to deal with that. Like it's so 5 years away that and also like an over extrapolation of actually what these LLMs can do. They're great and they're going to be quite useful, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves. I prefer like trying to correct correct something on the back end side than trying to predict it. And the US is being a much more predictive mode on like how it's going to be bad and how it's going to be good. And Europe is sort of kind of like neutral. And then China is like, no, this is going to be good for our society. And so I think Americans need to understand that like LLMs are great, and they're going to be revolutionary in many categories, typically categories that require search and discovery. But we don't need to, most of the innovation around LLMs are basically the UX experience. So, and how actually data and content gets like created and how you actually do that. Then there's like, that's kind of the main innovation. The secondary innovation are things related to creative power. So graphics, photos, images, things that would previously require a designer. All that stuff is also quite impressive. But it doesn't mean that like that's going to replace artists. Like, you know, a Picasso is still a Picasso, right? So like it's people are getting way ahead of themselves in terms of thinking that this is actually going to accurately replicate the creative power of humanity. It can accurately, I'd say, replicate you hiring someone from Fiverr to write you a blog post. It can do that, right? But telling me that's going to be Hemingway, right, is come on, like be serious right now, right? There is a great thing, and like it's basically like I always view innovation. You know, I'm not part of the was it the E-ACC, whatever. I'm not really there, but I'm kind of somewhere between. Because I think technology has morality, needs to be associated, but we don't need to stop. So I always view like innovation steps as replacing something that was already low valued in the system, and allows humans to be more human. So it's like we live in a Star Wars world, not a Star Trek world. So AI is enabling other sentient creatures and creatures that have morality and free will to do more human things, to be greater artists, to be greater, you know, things that are uniquely human, right? Creativity power, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So AI is going to be more useful to people to be more creative and to do greater things versus the Star Trek orientation, which I think is where the Biden administration is, and where like a lot of people who are AI researchers, but then you talk to them actually about how they understand intelligence, and they literally think that humans are just a computer, and like, okay, this is just a reflection of your priors, not actually true based on the ontological framework that we exist in the world. So Star Trek, I do not believe has actually ever been proven. I like if you look at the history of innovation, Malthusian, like Malthus was wrong. Like it just never happened. So the idea that AI can come along and replace things and become its own sentience to where it creates value, right? There's so many things locked up into that, like presuppositions around like what that means. To give people kind of a step back to maybe calm their nerves. Remember self-driving? That self-driving replaced truck drivers, which is one of the highest paid careers right now. Taxi cabs, this, right? None of that happened, right? Because I know, and I was actually on record saying, back in 2014 or something like that, saying that that's not going to happen, right? Because there are so many assumptions people had about like how roads work and why we designed it around humans, that like humans innately through intuition, which you don't understand exactly about like how intuition works, that like you can't map into a zeros and one. Like you can look at down Market Street. You can look at that and understand what to do, right? Just by intuition. But how you tell via intuition to a computer, humans designed into something like that. Like there's all these assumptions built into that road that aren't even articulated. Like you can't articulate. It's just through years and years of research and iteration that's designed around humans. And to say like a robot is just going to come in and scan stuff and like come to that intuition is just absurd. Like it's like that's not how it works. It's not zeros and ones that create intelligence and knowledge. Humans create design intelligence. It requires agency, right? And this is all basic, philosophical points that you would know if you just studied theology or Socrates or the classics. But a lot of people in tech don't know anything about those things. They don't know anything about it. Like they never read John Locke's theory about free will, right? And so they come with like really cool things like computing power, LLMs, right? Machine learning, and really great innovations. And then they say it's going to replace all this stuff. And I'm always like, no, it's never happened. Like it's always created more things, more opportunities, more wealth for people. And in any of the stories of replacement, if you go back and look historically, you're like, it's exaggerated. That's not really what happened. Like if anything, it's like a within one generational cap. Let's say like automobile to horses, right? Or sorry, other way around, horses to automobiles. Like you actually look at the job created, right? it was more of a plateau and then decline. But the adoption of the automobile took decades, right, to actually get to that point. And the same thing will be with LLMs. Same thing with self-driving, is that it at first will enable humans to be more human. So, work on highways, it'll work like on like low sort of variability environments, and then it'll go downstream, right? But it has to solve the simplest use case first. And so LLMs, the same thing. Like if it can't, hallucinate, and if it constantly hallucinates, which we can't really control either yet, we can try, but it takes time. Like if it can't repeat back a book accurately, you can't tell me that people are gonna it's gonna replace stock traders, right? Because if an LLM goes south, who are you gonna blame? Like the morality, the agency on the other side of if something goes wrong, right, is a key part of our society and it's a basis of our justice system. So to say that self-driving cars are going to drive down the street and hit somebody and we don't know who's responsible, society's not going to tolerate that. So that's a whole other level of anthropology that people in technology don't understand. Is society has to have a functional justice framework to work through these innovations, which is why yes, it's bleeding edge, it's cutting edge, it's super cool, we can see the future. But as Andreessen says, constantly people overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term. 100% agree that in the long term, LLMs, GPUs, AI are going to transform lots of parts of our society, but it's not going to happen within 5 years. We're talking about 2 decades, a decade, or something like that.
When we think about AI, I look at it idea, software, hardware, right? It's kind of there's this overarching idea. It feels like today that is where politicians and regulators are focusing all their time and effort. They're oh, these are scary ideas. To your point, kind of Star Trek versus Star Wars, type thing. The software, it seems like there is a battle between open source versus closed source and different companies and different, kind of thought processes. You are more so going after the hardware component and you're saying, hey, these GPUs are going to be pretty damn important. And there are different strategies here. Can you outline your strategy versus the other strategies when it comes to the hardware itself?
Yeah. So we think that, that this will follow a very similar trend to cell phones and what happened with the chip makers there, which is you have an initial burst of for a couple of years or lots of value creation on chip maker side because people want the chips, they find a use case and there's a shortage. And then it goes into the next phase, which is infrastructure development. So cloud hosting, platform companies. And then the last phase actually is consumers, right? So consumer goods. And so that is, if you look at that, that's took a course of 12 years. Different things were created during that time frame, right? And so we think same thing's gonna happen with GPUs. I think GPUs is basically what quantum, right? GPUs is actually the thing that's gonna work, right? And it has downsides, which is GPUs are terrible at any sort of complex workload, right? They're very, very good at parallelization. So, which are very simple jobs. So if there's a transition point, which we'll see with these Grace Hoppers that are coming out, which could be absolutely incredible, that the combination of both high performance CPU and high performance GPU to be able to combine those could be actually the thing that actually transforms a lot of workloads. Because there are still CPU, most of the workloads in, cloud can actually be done by GPUs. And video rendering and which are heavy on CPU side, those are all things that occupy a lot of horsepower there, right? So I only see that GPUs are basically because they are so dense, they are immensely powerful for what in terms of teraflops for their size, and that Apple obviously released a GPU into their phone. That's where we're going to see sort of this next phase of movement, which is a combination. I don't really believe in replacement. I think over the course of time, things kind of commingle or go into hybrid mode. And then it then splits where you have people who continue on hybrid mode, continue old mode, and continue on new mode. So I always like to use cars or watches as examples for these things. So as an example, as great for everyone knows hybrids. Obviously Prius was the thing that transformed the market, right? And so we still have the continuation of normal cars, and we have hybrid, and obviously have absolute electric, right? And so that's going to be for a long time going to be the orientation of hardware. CPU is still going to be the dominant form of computing infrastructure, but we're going to have hybrid and an absolute, sort of GPU, and both of those new markets are going to be most of the growth in infrastructure over the coming 10 years. But it doesn't mean that the 300 or $400 billion CPU market is not huge and it's growing slowly, right? But the GPU market is just going to ramp up and continue to do that because it generally always creates, as you have new inventions, it creates more wealth and more and greater growth. So our belief is that from our company is that more GPUs out in the market, the better it's going to be, especially as you go into refurb, clean and pull, refurbishing side, which we've only started seeing the beginning of, that GPUs become cheaper and cheaper. And, their lifespan can be 5 to 7 years. And that's going to be pushed more CPU usage into GPUs. And we're going to be more in a hybrid mode for the coming 4 or 5 years as people continue to experiment with GPUs, find it very useful for certain things, very, very useful for certain things, and then not for others, and continue to invest in CPU and GPU. So we are building a platform until we make it. It doesn't matter if you want to get a card in Texas or a card in Sweden, the same interface, same API, same security keys, all the framework is the same. You can access any data center in the world. So that's our goal, is to be the Kayak or the Airbnb for GPUs, where you can get any GPU at any data center in the world. So we currently manage about $100 million worth of GPU infrastructure right now. You can go on our website, you can buy everything from an A10 up to an H100. And we're completely agnostic to any form of hardware. We actually even have alternatives to the NVIDIA. They do exist. And they're putting that on our platform from Intel, from AMD. The more GPUs, the better, because people are going to be in an experimentation phase for the next 5 years as they go hybrid, right? As they try these different, ways of incorporating GPUs into their stack. But what we are seeing very clear adoption, very fast and very clear adoption among enterprises. But we're not going to go, bait and switch and cancel all of our CPUs. Like, the CPUs are still very, very useful. But I think it's going to be more and more like what the Grace Hopper is leaning into, or the new H100 is going to come out end of next year, where boosting CPU usage within the GPU framework in this hybrid approach is going to be what people ask for as they try to figure out what to do with this new technology.
Now, what's interesting to me is, let's say, geography as kind of one, lens of this, or one aspect. Mm-hmm. So I have seen some people say, hey, we're going to build centralized data centers and we've got this amazing stuff. I know of a company, Northern Data in Europe, that seems to have one of the bigger clusters there, and that seems to be a competitive advantage for them. There are companies here in the United States that say, hey, we have certain capabilities or geographic advantages as well. I then even saw, I think it's called Dell Complex. They want to build like the compute, center in a sovereign nation floating in the sea. And they've got kind of a whole plan, and whether that's possible or not, like, they're going to go attempt it. What you all are basically saying is like, well, what if we just actually create a layer on top of all of these people, and then you can just pick and choose depending on the day, the job, the specific, regulatory thing that you're trying to solve for. And so as you have gotten, started with this, two questions immediately popped to mind. How many people know where they want to be? They're like, specifically, I want, a GPU from Texas or from this European country, versus they just want diversification in general. And they just, they want to try to avoid centralization.
So I think that what's going to be very interesting with what GPUs will change as a secondary effect that hasn't been, I guess, fully appreciated in the market, is that because they are so energy dense, aka expensive to run, and they're also small, that it's going to reimagine how you think of data centers in terms of the world market. So I do think you're going to see smaller data centers in more interesting places with attached to renewable energy or attached to some form of like cheap energy source. That's going to be the break in the market, because the cost of running a GPU compared to CPU, you're looking at maybe 10 times the magnitude, and that matters more for real estate purposes, right? Like the actual physical components of a data center matter much more than ever before. Versus CPU, you're talking about single digit points and stuff like that on running a bunch of CPUs. So you can't just run it in Virginia, as well as like GPUs are not as sensitive based on how people use it on networking between different countries, right? So versus CPUs, that's much more important. So this is why, like, I think it becomes more hybrid, is that like their GPUs are just really good right now at very specific things that they can only be very good at. And so we're gonna have this fracturing now of like mega data centers that are still gonna exist, because CPUs need to be in a mega data center, and the cost of running it is just, kind of unbeatable. But for these like next wave of computing, it's going to be much more modular. It's going to be smaller or be like beyond chips or something like that, to where they find an advantageous place on the real estate side and also on the energy side. So that's like that forcing function, and that's actually not changing, because the if you look at the arc as teraflops increase per new GPU card, the energy cost to run those is actually linear. So they have not been able to break that curve. So as for example, Grace Hoppers, like for most data centers, it would literally running one Grace Hopper would explode the data center, right? Like so like that, even that, like the energy is increasing, right? So like there was one estimate, I think, from Ireland, or was it Iceland, like 25-30% of their energy costs like are actually just data centers, right? So that's only going to get worse as people go shift towards advanced computing. And so when customers are coming to us, mostly they're looking at just, I need to find a card to do something specific. So that's also the forcing function around the distributed compute, is that because there's less in it, like actual like ISP needs, so like getting data to the data center as it relates to GPUs, they're much more interested in being distributed because there's not enough cards. And so they're much more concerned around pricing, availability of cards. That's pushing it to be distributed. The second is that a lot of these companies are going into sovereign LLM hosting, because the price of the GPU is so expensive that you're like, well, I can just buy my own hardware and it can pay back itself in a year, right? And then you have the other side, which is like the shortage, which is like, if you're running, for example, a training session and someone kicks you off, like the training session is done. It's just, like, there's no like pausing it and then restarting it, right? It's like all that work that was done is just lost, right? So there is a strong desire to shift towards their own infrastructure because of the shortages and the fact that the hardware itself is immensely valuable, and they just want to run their own hardware because they just want to run a model anytime they want. So that it is having a renewed impact on the colo space and sort of REITs that are part of data centers, because there's this huge movement now back to bare metal. And you have like obviously king of the hill is NVIDIA, which is running this prison yard game of like trying to get cards and stuff like that, trying to control the supply. But they don't really want to sell to public cloud. They don't want to be in the same position. Going back to that same metaphor about the phone market, Intel and et cetera, like IBM, were amazing growth, right? And then crash and crater, right? As the next wave of infrastructure companies took over and owned that customer segment, right? So NVIDIA knows that, and Jensen is very smart. And so obviously he went from gaming to AI and machine learning, and that was an amazing play by him. So he knows that like the next wave is actually disintermediating the value of the chip. And I think every major cloud company, maybe except Microsoft, is working on their own GPU card, right? Because they want to be held to NVIDIA. And NVIDIA knows that. So NVIDIA is trying to push as close to the customer as possible. So they're trying to get footprint. They're trying to get to data centers so that they can have an actual place in a physical location. So they cannot be disintermediated like you can with public cloud. And so, yeah, sure, public cloud is still one of the largest buyers. But if you talk to anyone like that works in NVIDIA, like, they're like, they do not want that to be a continued relationship, because anyone NVIDIA wants to have NVIDIA customers, right? They don't want to have Amazon through Amazon type of customers, which is smart. Like it is quite smart. And their whole DGXs is also trying to do that. Their software packages, CUDA, like these are all trying to create that footprint and permanence. And to be fair to them, it is still the best. Like there is nothing that really comes close to anything that they produce versus what's on the AMD or IBM side. If you have a very specific, like say PyTorch, package or workload, yeah, you could probably get an IBM GPU that can do something very similar. But the power of the generalized framework that which NVIDIA has created is right now unbeatable. And so I think they're going to be kings for at least another 2 or 3 years.
What is your greatest fear when it comes to these kind of like advanced computing wars? There's nation states, there's company competition, there is regulation. Like, what's the doomsday scenario in your mind that we have to work diligently to avoid?
This episode is brought to you by Auradine. They are a brand new startup led by a number of Silicon Valley legends who just raised $81 million to build the future of internet infrastructure. You're probably wondering what that means, so let me explain. There are numerous new disruptive technologies that are being adopted simultaneously, from blockchain to artificial intelligence to zero-knowledge technologies. In order to ensure that these technologies thrive in this new world, we need new infrastructure, and that is where Auradine comes in. They just launched their first product line called Teraflux, which is a Bitcoin miner powered by the world's first 4-nanometer silicon chip technology. These air-cooled, single-phase and dual-phase immersion cooling miners have unrivaled speed and efficiency. They have superior uptime, and they leverage a brand new innovation called Energy Tune that allows miners to dynamically adjust the energy consumption and Bitcoin hash rate based on demand response needs of the electrical grids. Auradine is an ambitious company working on hard problems. I'm really impressed with them. And if you want to check out more, you can go to auradine.com. That's AURADINE.com. Go check them out at auradine.com today.
I would probably only say the negative case where we become so obsessed about the possible negative downsides that we lose the ability to actually continue to lead here. And that would be, I think, the thing that would be the biggest fear is that we become obsessed with what, we saw in Black Mirror, and that becomes like our orientation of what this technology is versus the reality, the historical truth, the just nature of humanity is that it ends up being like a net gain. And yeah, there's downsides, but those downsides generally are like already human pathologies, right? Like it's like if you cut off, if we go back and do prohibition again, right? Humans will still find other pathologies, right? Because our nature is to find pathologies, is to find addictions, to find medications, to our own internalized drama, our own internalized story. So I think that is the biggest concern is that politicians specifically who are immensely uninformed. I mean, you just look at them physically; they look uninformed, even though they say things that are uninformed. Like that, we become more obsessed with a geriatric narrative of something they read when they were in high school back in the 1950s, versus like what the future actually is and where we can go as humanity, and America can still be the leader. So my biggest fear is if America continues to not want to be a winner, to not want to win and be number one, because Americans don't appreciate that we are a benevolent imperial power, and we are probably the first. Like, tell me any other country in the history of the world, of humankind too, just like forever 9,000 years of recorded history, that where we invade a country, we destroy it, utterly eviscerate it, and then we make a democracy, and then we let them go. And we've done that like 6 times, right? Philippines, Japan, Korea, Germany, Taiwan, right? Like we do this as a lifestyle, right? And I think we just kind of like almost are embarrassed by it, or we don't appreciate it, but it's beautiful. It's an amazing thing that America can be the absolute power and can still give people freedom, and that we set the terms, right, on what it means to be free within context, like, and with like we still have, obviously Germany's still Germany, we're still America, but like we did that, right, and we should be very proud of that. But instead, we sort of have this, well, we don't want to be number one, and like we gotta let multiculturalism to like we're a colonizer. Like I don't understand. It's like, do you believe that you live in this country and most likely your parents immigrated, or their parents or their parents? Like, how do you not see that this is the best way to live life? If you don't want, as a country, you don't want to have that, that is your decision, right? But to say that our style and our lifestyle is bad or should not be promoted is crazy. Because if China's promoting theirs, and every other country is promoting theirs, but we sort of like, no, we shouldn't, right? The more people that follow, Western Civ, right? And we generally are, that we have, a very strong contingent of Americans that do not believe in Western Civ, but the broad umbrella, Western Civ, it objectively works. Like it's a, like, look at Israel. Okay. So it's the biggest thing of the day, right? So before Israel existed, right? Before the 1919 agreement, before 1948, 47, that whole area was like a shantytown, right? It was crap, right? Nobody wanted to live there. It was poor, right? It didn't have running water, electricity, like it was like Bedouin life, right? And then they come along and start off actually as a socialist, with the what's it called, the kibbutz, the socialist frameworks there. Then they actually became more free. It's one of the few countries in world history that goes from socialist, communist orientation to become more free. and it's a paradise now, right? It is a first world country that has Arabs, Jews, Christians, alternative lifestyle, live freely, have rights, and can vote, and can make significant amount of money compared to anywhere else in the Arab region. And that's because they believed in those ideas and they followed through with them, right? And so that's my orientation in terms of why I'm in technology, why I'm involved in politics, is I want every human being to have access to that. If they don't choose, if they don't want it, whatever. If the Gaza and West Bank want to reject those ideas and live the way they do, that is their decision. But you can't launch rockets. You can't launch terrorist attacks. You can't destroy life itself and creativity itself. If you want to be a toxic country, you can just go do that on your own time, right? And I think that's the posture that Americans need to have. Is that it's so. Let me think of it this way: it's like we're almost shy way of saying America's policeman, or sorry, world's policeman. And I just kind of like that word because police are not there all the time, right? But we should clearly run all of the the trading routes. We should run Treasury. We should run SWIFT. We should run these things because we actually are a good benevolent dictator, right? Because who else is going to run it? You can't just exist in this void of UN world government nonsense. The only reason why the UN exists is because America says it exists, and we say it's important. That's it. No other reason, no other explanation. We say it's important, therefore it's important. We say Israel's important, therefore Israel's important. That is good. That is a good action and a good act of our country and a good act of our values. And so when it comes to these future technologies, we need to have the same approach, which is these are good things. And we believe in the future prosperity that this can create. If you don't want to do that, if you want to be China, if you want to use AI against your citizens, whatever, that's your decision. But you're not going to spread that to Korea. You're not going to spread that to Japan. You're not going to put this in Singapore, Philippines, wherever, or in Africa. They don't want your crap. They don't like your bribes. They don't like your failed infrastructure projects or your airports that don't work. They don't want that. Don't pressure them to do that, right? That's how we can be a world's policeman. It doesn't mean we launch missiles into freaking Shanghai, right? But it clearly means that this is how the world works. You can participate or you don't. If you don't, you can hurt your own people, but don't hurt the rest of the world.
Give me the ultra bull case. AI, EAC, technologists take over the world. The utopia gets built. Just everything works. What does that world look like?
I think there'd be a lot more people. I'm on the Elon train. More people. Love people. I don't know how you fly over America and be there's too many people. It's people are great. And more people. Technology creates human flourishing. And to use a trite phrase on the center right, I think it would be that there would probably actually be more onshoring. I do think the LLMs kind of reimagine the way we think about low wage work. I think that it enables other sort of more technical jobs that would be on the lower end side that could move people up. So rather than working at fast food, they're working at a data center that's working on technical LLM machines, still working with their hands. I actually think that the best case is more movement of manufacturing back to America because we're understanding the importance of infrastructure and the importance of doing things ourselves. And one of the downsides, it's so interesting. Sowell is very famous for writing about secondary effects, right? That's his big MO, right? He does about race, he does about welfare, right? Voting rights, everything, right? His books are always great about that. The secondary effects, right, of China lying about COVID has been that people are wow, it's actually not the cheapest place to produce stuff anymore in China. It's actually Mexico, right? Almost all the goods. All right, it's better to do Mexico. Oh, they're actually hostile. Oh, they're actually spying on us. Oh, they're actually taking it actually opened up all of this stuff, right? We're before we're libertarian, neoliberal. Oh, just trade and everything will work out, right? It's as if you can bribe a bully on the playground with candy every month and that'll make him not beat you up, right? So we have the secondary effect of what China did was that it reopened everybody to the fact of we actually should not rely on one country to do everything, and it's not the best country at many of those things. And so the China Plus strategy on supply chain is a permanent feature of every major multinational now. So that's a down China lost there. Another secondary effect, right, is that all of the blue cities that host all these tech companies are doing terribly, right? They supported the lockdowns and they continued it. They continued the mandates, vaccine, the mask, whatever. And it just destroyed their economy, right? It destroyed, no one wanted to live there. They just moved to Florida or Texas or Arizona or Colorado, where I am. And And so like the secondary order effects is like where I think the maximum upside is where we can actually see. It's like, yeah, LLMs, great, can transform products. I think most LLMs are going to be features. So like as in when you go to Charles Schwab, they have their own LLM, but it's not going to be like an LLM company, right? I think there's going to be very limited number of those people, like maybe OpenAI, right? From a consumer perspective, but the number of winners are going to be very, very small. Most of the winners are going to be integrations into other products. And because the value of that LLM is like the UX and the data. And that's something that a company can do themselves and probably will do themselves. Like, you think Schwab is just going to give over all of its data to OpenAI to run it? No, of course not, right? Like they run their whole freaking colos, like they run all their own infrastructure. You think Goldman Sachs is going to do that, or American Airlines or United? No, they run they're all on colo, right? So they have their own infrastructure. So they're just going to build their own LLMs. So the open source world is going to win. It's going to move way too fast. All the proprietary model stuff is going to go, I think, south. Like there'll be a couple big winners, just as brand names that you just use. But the ability to like not have ownership over your LLM, I think it creates too much secondary order risk, as in responsibility. Like, imagine there's an LLM for Donald Trump, right? Which would be freaking hilarious. But like, let's say it says something that it doesn't believe, right? Like Trump doesn't actually believe, but that's run by a third party. So, but who is going to be held accountable to the public eye? It'd be actually whoever's running the Trump LLM at the organization, not the third party. So that, like, for those scenarios where it would hallucinate or fail, if they don't own that infrastructure, that data, they can't just throw it to a third party. They're going to want to own it themselves, right? So they can change the weighting, and they can change the areas that are like these sort of like, I would say edge cases, but like hallucinations. And they can have actually ownership over that. So they can like say like, oh, you did that wrong, go fix it, right? Versus throwing it to a third party. So I think that the most of the LLMs that are going to see that are going to dominate the market are going to exist in that zone where it has to have like 95% up accuracy. And I just can't see, if you look at other things that enterprises have done where it is that for like uptime, right? Say for hosting, they generally build their own stuff, right? They don't want to outsource that to a third party that they can't control. And so that's where I think LLMs mostly going to be a feature. So then the secondary effects of that are going to be jobs, like just different ways of working with LLMs, different types of people who manage LLMs, the infrastructure behind it, new ways of like doing customer service is going to open up another, like, so I see most positive impacts on jobs and wage growth. Do not see much negative impacts. And again, the more people that we can move up the chain to where they can, we can create a good lifestyle for people who, don't go to college and who have, want to work with their hands. I think that's where we have seen a lot of the failed American dream, is that we, as I know, like, you've talked about, it's like telling people to go through a system of indoctrination to get a degrey has obviously not worked. So we need to provide other means, and Silicon Valley can actually provide those means. If we allow it to flourish and go forward. I have no idea why people think as the Biden EO about AI is going to replace manufacturing jobs. It's literally bizarre. Like it's just, I don't even understand. It's if they're going to make a machine to have LLM in it to do something, you need a person to push the thing, to make the thing, to get it, and to move it, right? It's manufacturing. It's a physical good, right? So it's going to have more capability for more people to go do that job because it'd be easier for them to do, right? But it's just a total, like, politics is, and it's on both sides, not just this is Biden is current president. So, I mean, I think if there was a Republican, especially a mainstream established Republican, it would have been a very similar EO. They just don't understand like how wealth gets created, how value gets created at a company, and the innate importance of humans in that value creation process. Instead, and if you look at how they actually legislate, they don't really care about people. They don't really understand them. They live in this like aloof world where they think that everyone cares about Zelensky and the freedom movement in Ukraine. Nobody does, right? Nobody, right? And I can't wait till we see the grifts and the graft that like has been done on the Ukraine war. And the people were like, "Oh my God, how'd that happen? Look, literally what we did. He's a freaking corrupt person that has banned freedom in his country. It's like a Putin versus Putin, right? So he didn't invade Poland or freaking Finland. He invaded another autocracy. So of course there's going to be massive grift. Like all of a sudden these weapons end up in Iran. I wonder how that happened, right? Politicians just, as it comes to AI, as a revolution and other things, they just live in this alternative reality where they do not have attachment to people. And that's a whole like other side of the conversation. But like, yeah, I think the whole legislative branch and all this stuff needs to be reformed to where it actually represents things that people want and they feel like they have actual voice in the system, not this, because the current situation you have is like massively unstable. It's scary, but I mean, we'll work it out. America has worked it out several times before, but the level of insurgency of anti-West ideas in our country is immensely concerning. And we just sort of continue to play games with Ukraine war. Oh, like send missiles over there, like versus the stuff in front of us now. We just sort of push under the rug and be like, no, it's just, yeah, we just ignore it. They're just, kids who are playing along with like a narrative. Like, no, this is like ideological, self-destructive behavior that if you read, any biography about Russia, it became massively uncontrolled. And Russia became communist because 7,000 people that were part of the Bolshevik Party took over an interim government that was chaotic. And then they became communist. Like, it doesn't take many people to destroy something. And we just sort of, oh, who cares, right? It's just kids playing, right? No, this is like a very serious thing in our country.
Has America gone too far? Can it be saved? Can we roll it
back
and
I love
build a better, go build a better future?
Oh, I love it. I mean, if Trump can become president, dude, like, yes, like the country still has lots of energy in it. And besides, like, what else do we have, right? In Silicon Valley, there was it used to be a joke, right? That like, oh, if America goes south, well, they'll go to New Zealand, right? Well, look what happened there. Right? So, like New Zealand was a freaking hermit kingdom for 3 years, right? Do you really want to move there? Those freaking people are crazy, right? So, there's nothing left. There's no parachute. There's no exit option. Like the best would be Israel, right? But Israel is bad on COVID. But the best now, I'd say, would be Israel, and because they're going to fight to win. Like they will, the desire to be alive and to have humans that live in a successful, safe society in Israel is a shared belief, regardless of whatever party you vote for. And it's immensely beautiful and admirable. And you remember like that movie World War Z with like Brad Pitt, and they become a zombie in like 10 seconds, right? So in that movie, there's like 2 countries that survive. America's freaking toast, right? So of course it would be, right? Except like Texas, I think, in the movie, which just makes sense. So and so the 2 ones that remain are North Korea and Israel, right? And North Korea, because they pull out everyone's teeth and they shut down all the borders, right? And so they survive, but no one has teeth. And in Israel, right, they survive because they build a massive wall to protect all their cities, right? And what are they doing in the movie? They're letting people in. That was so true about Israel. Like that like, and I've been there, and I know many Israeli politicians. I know like former ambassadors to Israel. I love Israel. They're letting in all types of people, like Palestinians, Muslims, right, in the movie, and Israel is protecting them, right? Because as they said in the movie, like every additional one of us is less of them. That was just such a great image of Israel, right? And I wish that Americans would see that, like, that is who we used to be. That, like, we used to love immigration generally. We had moments where we didn't, and those were kind of justified. Like, we were letting in way too many people. Like during the sort of 5 points, New York City gang riots and things like that. We were not assimilating properly back then. It'd be funny if you take someone from a New York gang in like the late 1880s or 1910s, and you bring them to racial politics today, they'll be like, what do you mean? Like, I'm Irish. Like, he's German. We're not the same thing. And then today we're like, no, you're all white. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me, right? So it's just funny how historically how things evolve in terms of narrative. You look at culturally speaking, doesn't like, you go to Europe now, you say like, oh, Germans and Italians are all white. They'd be like, what do you mean? Like, we're completely different people, right? So blood and soil matters more than us here. But like the orientation of like how Israel views life is what we used to believe, and that if you believed in our values and you wanted to come here to participate in the largest, most successful multicultural nation in the history of human civilization, then you should do it. Nobody's complaining about Nigerians coming here, right? Like it's because they're immensely successful. Like and that's what we want. We want people like that who want to participate in the experiment. And it's a beautiful experiment. It's redemptive. Having a nation where race is secondary, right, to what you bring to the table, which has always been the goal of our society, even from the beginning. Like the 1619 Project is a lie. It's not true. Historically, not true. No historian ever just believes it. Even liberal historians who hate America say it's fictitious. None of it's true, right? It's a fanciful story about the past. The orientation of our country has always been that that's the goal, right? Is that what you bring, character, values, hard work, your faith, your innate value as a human is how we build our society, not based on land, not based on race, not based on, your religion or whatever sort of, creed that has caused wars in other countries. That you can come here and you can be free. And that's what we should continue to press into. The election, I think, of Trump was less so a statement, I think, about him particularly, and more of a statement that Americans still believe that America can be great. That's actually what it was. It was not him. It was not his family or his character or he is funny, but like his being funny, it was that he said over and over again that America should be great, should be powerful, and should win. And that is what Americans should continue to be. And that's still there. It is still there. And someone is going to leverage that in this upcoming election. And I think that's also what motivates our tech industry is that Andreessen Horowitz, Founders Fund, Lux Capital, right? Like there's still this orientation in Silicon Valley for, I would say great, like Elon's, I think, my favorite entrepreneur, like that America is the hope for the world, that the world can be different and history can be different. It doesn't mean we're perfect. Obviously, we have lots of examples in our country of not being perfect, but we are the country that gets past that, reconciles, and moves forward, right? We are not the country that like basically gazes at our sins and self implodes like every other country in the history of the world, where we bring up things of the past constantly and not try to move forward in the posture of forgiveness and grace. And so that is the forgiveness and grace part is probably where I'm most concerned about, is America lost? But I still think we're very much on the side of winning and being number one.
When I think of the future, I think about technologists solving problems. I think of young people becoming ambitious and going for it, trying to accomplish as much as possible. I think about Americans being proud of building things here in America, solving problems here in America, creating a better life here in America. How do we accomplish that from the earliest stages of someone's life? Right. It's some countries are very good at driving patriotism and nationalism and these things.
Yeah.
Other countries were good at it and getting worse. And some just have never been good at it. And so how do you think about what is the right degree of, in America, when I went to school, we stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance. I actually don't know if kids do that anymore or not. Right. But I don't
know if they do either. Yeah.
Like what does that look like in terms of, we want to build a stronger country? And so what should we be doing with young people?
Probably civil service is a requirement. I think that's a good solution. Western Civ is a requirement course. I think the whole grant system for higher ed needs to go away. I think higher ed needs to live under its own laurels and no longer operate on subsidies based on the federal government. I think that we should return back to some form of like how we view immigration as a combination of like family and merit based, some combination of both. Because I see merits for, to be frank, I see for both. I see it's very reasonable to, if you get in to bring your family, I think that's very reasonable. And I also think it should be based on merit, but it as well. So some blend of that. But a lot of it is history. It's like appreciating where you are in the strand of American life. And the most, like to use a biblical phrase, like the people that, plants that die in the sun or get washed away in the river and are deeply rooted. Like, so the first is from James and Matthew, the second one's from Proverbs, are people who don't understand where they come from and don't understand what the past is. And if you read the past, if you read deeply into, like, my favorite founding father is TJ. I call him TJ because I love Thomas Jefferson. you read him and you see a man that is not only brilliant, just like, he's so brilliant, but a man that struggles with the question of like, obviously slavery. Like he both called slavery and he owned slaves. He called slavery the original sin of America. He also had slaves. He also, the first bill he ever endorsed in the House of Burgesses in Virginia when he was a delegate was the abolition or the base of the possibility of slave to be free, which was banned in Virginia, right? He also included in the Constitution the banning of slave trade in the last paragraph. So he's a complex person, right? And I think that's where history has gone from objective analysis of like people just are complex and they suck, right? Most of the time, and they do great things still, right? And that we have to see and be empathetic to like people were really different when the country was founded, as they were different in the 1950s, the 1970s, and even 20 years ago. And we have to understand the cultural context that they were in, but not that the relativistic, like how that's relative, is the actual truth, right? It's only meant to design to create empathy. And I think that our educational system has become completely obsessed with the relativistic narratives within each like epoch of our country, and became the truth. No, like objective actions that happen and motivations are like important, but you have to like it's more of a posture of understanding than it is to judge. And as C.S. Lewis has the phrase, Americans have become increasingly detached, which is also becoming decreasingly patriotic because of chronological snobbery. They are more obsessed with their narcissistic view about their own morality and ethics of today, which is why like Ryan Long, I encourage everyone to watch him. He has great videos about this, right? Making fun of Americans and our own sort of, we like to smell our own farts, to use a South Park phrase, versus historically, like you would be very different, right? And that's where we need to appreciate where we are in that lineage and that timeline, because then we can come back and say, oh yeah, this is why America is great, because we have gotten past bad things. Not just bad things happen. Of course, every country has had bad things, right? Every country, like, slavery as an example, going back to Thomas Jefferson thing, we're the only country that fought a civil war over it, right? And continue to push against the fact that was in our country and that was embarrassing to us. Like the founding fathers was considered embarrassing. That we survived that, we moved on, right? And moved forward in life, right? Obviously, there's still lineages of debt from that, but we still move forward. That destroyed other countries, right? And that's where you focus on the things that are different, not the things that are universal. And as like Dennis Prager always says stuff like that too, that like it's not that we had slavery, it's that we fought to end it, right? And so I seen, to go back to Israel, because when I was on I was looking at the Mount of Olives, and I was like around the Temple Mount, and above the market, you see Israel, the IDF is teaching all the recruits about what happened to win Jerusalem back. And they have maps and stuff. They're pointing out, they're pointing in. There's people, they're teachers, right? And they're all in military uniforms. And what Israel is amazing at is because it's actually a life or death question. They have, I think it's 7 million people where I live there, and surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs and Muslims, and that every person has to be on the same page, right? Like every person has to be willing to take up their arms and fight, because it's literally death for us, right? If we aren't successful in this. So they're, I think, very good at creating alignment in the country about like, they have their own mess, obviously, with Netanyahu and all the like political crap that's going on. But when they get attacked, they're like, no. We have interfamily issues, but nobody messes with our country, right? And that's where Americans need to return back to. And I think it's like a lot of it's like education and teaching people that the lineage and the beauty of the American experiment is that it worked. And a lot of it was blessings from the Lord and luck and just right people, right time. But we've also have a system of government that has enabled us to work through things that have killed and destroyed an entire society. And that's what I focus on. I don't focus on that we had, all the embarrassing things we had in our country. We focus on the wins, because those wins are so rare in global human civilization that they're underappreciated because we focus on things that were mistakes.
My last question: you raised from Founders Fund and a few other investors. Has this all now just come down to like there's based investors and everyone else? How do you think about kind of the venture community?
Yeah. It's as I was saying in the first thing, it's like it's split. where like it's not even really it's not even around policy ideas. It's like you said, it's like based. It's like people who respect other people for making a stand. Like who's the guy at Sequoia that's become really famous on Twitter? He's a Jew and he's been tweeting a lot about Israel. I forgot his name. But he's been there. Yeah, yeah. So like, I mean, I'm sure he's a Dem, but like, and I'm not a Dem, but like, what he's doing is right. Like he's saying what he thinks, and he's being based. And I'm like, good for you, right? And that group of people, right, is only growing because the based VC community, the red pill VC community, right, are people that like are not really oriented around taxes or even like candidates. It's just this belief that like I should be able to say what I want and not be called all these names, especially when you logically think about what I'm saying, and it does not even come to equate to what that the guy has been the guy from Sequoia has been insulted by. And but like you what makes Silicon Valley amazing is the fact of like that used to be what made it great was you challenge the status quo, right? You would say going to Stanford was a useless waste of time. Like that used to be the things that we would say. And the regulatory capture, I think, of like Web 2.0, which got way too intermingled with Obama, kind of like sucked in all those people, right? Where they got, interested in power, right? But you see that like the natural tendency of what I call Web 1.0, PayPal mafia, Andreessen Horowitz, Peter Thiel, right? Type of folks, like that's still there. That's sort of like rebellious, the challenging, the being heterodox, right? And even if someone who was sucked in to that, regulatory capture, big government Obama, I'm talking about Zuck, is like moved back, right? Like you see Zuck, and like obviously Zuck is red pilled, right? He does CrossFit, like he's doing, martial arts, his statements about free speech, right? Like he obviously saw like, okay, these people are like not my type, right? Originally they were kind of playing ball like with the government, and then they're like, holy crap, okay, no, this is actually this is not a good idea, right? And I think that community is going to continue the innovation curve, right? And the crypto people, Bitcoin, a lot of LLM people, defense tech, like we're kind of part of the defense tech world. Really hard problems, sort of entrepreneurs are going to be continued being the base people who are challenging and status quo to like create innovation to create human flourishing and wealth. There's a large segment of the tech world that are, what I would say, fair weather sort of tech people who are only interested in like flipping companies, not creating long-term value for our society or for the world, and are just in it because it's a label. And I think that world is going to kind of like continue to be around, but kind of disappear because they're not really creating anything of value. They're just playing different narratives. But that core contingent of like hardcore, I call Web 1.0, like the heart of that, which is the Western sort of cowboy California, we can build our own wealth and our own companies and our own world. That is still going to drive, I think, the majority of innovation. And those investors and those entrepreneurs are just going to continue to like isolate and get around each other. Because who wants a board member on your company that's like, supporting what, people who are terrorists, like, and not just like privately, like openly and like promoting it, right? Like, and so entrepreneurs now are like kind of returning back to like, okay, we need to get focused. This stuff is crazy. It was fun for a little bit, but I see that these people are actually not on our side. And it's not even political. It's just like, like you said, it's like based, non-based sort of frameworks.
Where can we send people to find more about Hydra or find you on the internet, wherever you're hiding?
Also on Twitter, AGINNT, and then hydrahost.com. And I write on Substack. I write mostly about masculinity and religion on Substack. And then Medium, I write about business stuff. But yeah, like on Twitter, you'll kind of see me randomly throwing up, different things I find kind of funny on the internet. But yeah, hydrahost.com is our GPU infrastructure company, and hopefully, giving the world access to as many GPUs as possible. So,
Aaron, I learned so much every single time that we've talked. I appreciate that you just say what you think, which I think is a core skill that we need more people to do in the world. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And we'll definitely do it again in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, man.